Kelly Bear here. Welcome to my channel. I am with you today for a bit of a philosophical waffle. I don't really know where it's going to go, all at rhymes, but I do have some notes and some stuff prepared. I am expecting a delivery, so the doorbell might go whilst I am recording, so I will have to pause recording and go have to answer the door if that's the case. But fingers crossed, it won't arrive until I have finished filming. One can hope, but we shall see. So, make sure I remember to drink my tea. Oh, it nearly went down the wrong pipe. Oh, I did kind of go down the wrong pipe. I'm going to pause so I can... Oh my god. Wow, like my eyes are watering from coughing. Oh dear. Anyway, this is off to a great start. But I have a stack, I have some books here, I have a stack of guidebooks for various tarot decks and the corresponding cards. And this all sort of came off the back of a number of card draws that I made last week. Last week I did something that I don't often do, which is a daily draw. I don't often do a daily draw. On top of that, what was making it even more unusual is that I was only doing a single card pull rather than my usual sort of minimum of 3. And I was using a Smith-Waite based deck, not a Marseille or Pip deck. So that's 3 for 3 on sort of breaking my usual habits, my usual practice. But I just felt the need to. I felt drawn to this particular deck. The deck being the Ostara Tarot. I have the mass market version, and yeah, I just felt like I just felt the need to. So what I would do is I would do my offerings in the mornings, and then before I get up from my altar, I would pull a card just right there at the front of my altar. I didn't sort of bother with any bells and whistles, as I often don't anyway, but this is very sort of much just sitting crisscross applesauce in front of my altar and pulling a card. And what I did over on my Instagram account, and I will share you can't really see it there, I will share a link to it down below in the description box, but well, that's not very good, is it? Anyway, I took a picture of each of the cards that I had pulled last week, so for the five working days, and looking at them, and there was sort of a definite pattern and a definite kind of message there. And so what I would ask was, what kind of energy or attitude do I need to cultivate today? That was what I was asking with my draw. And I was going by the message that was in the guidebook. So, oh yeah, actually, so that was 4 for 4. I wasn't even relying on intuitive hits. I was just going, let's see what the guidebook says, like straight off the bat. So that was 4 things that I wouldn't usually do. I don't know why. I just obviously just needed some novelty, some change, and I put here. I'm just reading from my own Instagram post. I found each draw to be nudging me along as I balanced my time between work and creative joy and play. A balance that left me feeling much more inspired and invigorated than if I just forced myself to push through with sewing for my shop. I did sew for my shop, but whenever I felt the urge to stop and do something just for myself, I did, and I actually found that gave me more energy and more drive to actually do my actual work. So it sort of plays into that idea that I've been talking about, which is doing more by doing less and being consistently inconsistent. So I found, much to going against my initial thoughts, that if I stopped to do some personal sewing, some personal craft projects, that it would sort of, I mean, and this can happen where I sort of go into hyperfocus and I'm sort of away with the fairies on some other project, and I spend however many days or weeks burning myself out on that particular thing, and I don't get anything productive done, which can happen and does happen. But I found doing it in a sort of more sort of paced, measured way, it was invigorating me, and it was giving me more motivation and more inspiration to then carry on with sewing my pouches and coming up with ideas for my shop, rather than me just getting carried away. So that was an interesting lesson there. The theme of balance is an important one for me this year. as my card for 2023 is Temperance. So that was the, you know, finding the balance between doing stuff that I need to do, whether that is, you know, my sort of work, my creative work for my shop, for my business, whether that is doing things around the house, whether that's running errands, you know, life admin, just adulting, just general stuff, taking care of my Nomi, Dr. Nomi, my dog, all those kinds of things. Finding the balance between doing the things that you have to do and doing things that you want to do. And I would say, like, I'm the kind of person I've realized I very much need to be able to have creative play. It's very intrinsic to my sort of relaxation, getting inspired, being motivated. And it was a real the last week was a real sort of lesson in going, oh yeah, like this is something I used to know, but I've gotten so bogged down with you know, with work and feeling like I have to be a productive little human, a productive little unit, which is this idea that we all need to be sort of little worker bees, which is not helpful for any of us, let alone those of us that live with chronic illnesses that cause fatigue and pain, you know. And also I just yeah, it was a real, I've just suddenly lost the train of my thought there. I had something I was going to say and it just floated away out of my brain. It might come back to me, but there was something else I was going to say. It's a runaway, that rhymes. So yeah, so I will share a link to this this post if you want to read it in full, because I only sort of read an abbreviated version, a little bit of it. But this idea, so I've had one particular Temperance card on display on my altar all year thus far, so far, which is the Temperance card from the Next World Tarot by Christy C. Rode. This deck is one of my favourite decks. This is the larger version. I do have the wee pocket version as well now, but I figured this is a better one to have on my altar because it's bigger, I can see it more clearly. And the reason that I've been using this one, I used the Death card from this deck last year on my altar as well. Death was my card of the year last year, therefore Temperance is the card this year. And I just really like the way Christy C. Rode writes about the tarot, talks about the tarot. I've been following her on Instagram for a long time. I think long before she was doing a tarot deck. I've always been a fan of her artwork. And yeah, I just really enjoyed her interpretation of this particular card and of many cards. But I just thought I'd read it because it's something that I've been trying to contemplating. I think I've been thinking about for a while. So Temperance, I'm not going to read all of it, I'm just going to read bits of it. And it says here that Temperance learned balance and patience, feisty and aggressive in her teen years, and constricts. I'll show you the picture actually, so you can see that this is the character that has been spoken about here. This is Temperance. Constructively driven as an adult, she manifests her truest self without outside influence. Okay, so there's another little bit. I'll cut that bit out because I don't want to read all of Christy C. Rhodes' work, but also I'm just trying to read the bits that are relevant to what I've been thinking about. So a bit further down says, Temperance loves herself, her broken bones, her healed parts, and her humanity. Temperance may still fall. She's a musician, a woman, and a survivor of violence. She works nights, lives days, sleeps when she can, and fights when she can't. She will break sometimes, as the next world is being built on a world that historically silences women. Temperance asks you to forgive yourself with every break, but to try with every new morning. If that isn't linked to resilience and my word of the year, I don't know what is. And I think it's so funny because when I picked the word resilience, I don't think I knew that Temperance was my card of the year. I hadn't really put two and two together that from going on from the Death card that Temperance would then be my card for 2023. But it's linked so closely to the idea of resilience, especially the way that Christy C. Rode talks about it. It's so interesting, and we are in this point in time at the moment here in the UK at least, where the government is just, everything is just a lot, right? There's a lot of anti-trans sentiment, anti-immigration sentiment. We've not got a decent opposition to the Tory party. It's just, it's not even traditional conservative at this point, our government. It's literally leaning in towards fascism, and it has been for a while, and it's so worrying, and it's so hard to keep yourself buoyed up, but you need that resilience in order to keep fighting for another day. So it says she fights when she can't, and that it says here that forgive yourself with every break, right? But to try with every new morning. And for me, that's like when I talk about needing to take a break from social media. So I take a break from I barely touch Facebook, to be honest, but I'll have like mostly Twitter breaks, because Twitter is great for up-to-date information about certain things, about really up-to-date news, about sort of raising awareness of things. There's obviously a lot of crap on there as well, but I try to cultivate my feed towards, like, it's becoming more difficult because the algorithm is really jacked up, but I try to, it can still get a lot, and it can get very overwhelming, especially as I follow a lot of, you know, people from marginalized communities. I follow a lot of activists. I follow a lot of, you know, people working in environmentalism, working in dismantling ableism, and sort of things around COVID, which is still an issue, is still going on, and is very much still an issue for those of us who are clinically vulnerable and immunocompromised. And there's the problem with ableism and the left sort of even leaving sort of vulnerable folks behind, not advocating for, you know, workers' rights, and there's always just all sorts of things that I follow, but obviously it can get a lot. And then of course just any kind of big news story that it will be visible on Twitter, and so sometimes I like to stay informed and I like to keep on top of the news, but there's times when it's so much I feel like I cannot physically, mentally, emotionally, spiritually cope, and I will have a break. So I will have like a week or two, and I've spoken about this last week as well, like there is clearly inherent privilege in being able to step back, but it's the only way I know how to protect my physical and mental health, because if I'm anxious and stressed, it is a trigger for my chronic fatigue and my chronic pain, which puts me in a position where I can't do anything. If I'm strung out, like I would rather take a step back for a week or two and then come back renewed and be able to fight another day. Do you see what I mean? So, and you know, this is a very sort of, it's even a battle tactic in war, like sort of taking a break, reserving your troops. Not that I want to be talking about war, but you know, like we're sort of at war in a sense, sort of in a sort of activism capacity, sort of knowing when to take a break, that balance, that temperance, in order to maintain your resilience, in order to build resilience, in order to sort of gain your strength. Actually, funny enough, I'm looking over here, the card that I pulled a card for today, was the strength card, which is the second time this card has shown up for me in under 2 weeks. Yeah, the last time I pulled it was 11 days ago. I'm just trying to remember, it was a Sunday. Yeah, Sunday a couple of weeks ago almost. So yeah, 11 days. So this is the first twice in less than 2 weeks. The strength card, and I absolutely, this is one of my favourite strength cards of all time. It's the one from the Astara Tarot with the dragon. Oh, I absolutely love that card. Anyway, I'm really digging the Astara Tarot this month. I've used it almost exclusively, which is so unlike me to just really digging with just one deck. That and doing my year in the wildwood. I've obviously been looking at the wildwood a lot, as I have been most of the year, but I've been digging into it a bit more this month. So yeah, there's the idea of temperance, and it had me thinking, like, yesterday morning I wanted to sit down and do my offerings before I start work. So that's what I do every morning before I start work. I will sit down at my altar and I do my offerings to my spirit allies. I pull a card for the day at the moment. That will definitely change at some point, and sort of center myself, do a bit of breath work, maybe a little bit of meditation, just whatever I feel like I need. It's all the time, but it's usually sort of centered around doing offerings. And I sat down and they were putting the scaffolding up outside a building just right out the back there, and it was so loud. There was the clanging of the metal poles. There were these like workers, they were like yelling across at each other. It was so loud. And then the construction going on at the library gardens just over there. There was just like the tractors going and drilling, and I was just like, there was no way I was able to get myself into a centered and calm headspace in order to do what I needed to do. Which is ironic, right? Because when you're hearing, I'm very sort of affected by, I get very overstimulated very easily. And so all these noises were actively like causing a lot of distress and sort of overstimulation. And that's when I need like to sort of center in, and I couldn't. And I was like, I'm just going to have to do my offerings this evening. You know, once I've finished work for the day and everyone has knocked off for the day, usually builders will knock off by sort of mid-afternoon, usually by somewhere between 2 and 4 p.m, depending on when they started. So I knew that at least by sort of 5 or 6 p.m, I would be able to sit down, hopefully, and quietly do my offerings and everything else that I needed. And I was like, you know, which is interesting because until the beginning of this year, I was doing my offerings at the end of the day around 6 p.m, anywhere between sort of 5:30 and 6:30 p.m, once I'd finished work, as a way of sort of delineating between work time and me time. So whether that is, you know, just like non-professional times, like dividing, sort of mentally dividing my time, my day, from this is when I'm working and this is when I'm cooking dinner, doing a few bits around the house, chilling out, maybe reading, doing some psychic development, whatever it is, journaling, me time, sitting and watching a film or a TV show with my spouse. It was that delineation, and it really, and I have been doing my offerings in the evenings for a long time, but I found that if I was getting really stressed out throughout the day or just couldn't seem to get a hang of what I was doing throughout the day, I would end up just really stressing about the fact that I knew I had to do my offerings, which is really silly, right? Because it's a chance to actually decompress. So I switched it at the beginning of this year. I switched it to this morning so that they were done, because I knew that Aidan Wachter, I think it was in Six Ways or in podcasts that I've listened to him speak on, he mentioned that when he was doing talismanic jewellery, he no longer makes jewellery, but when he was making jewellery, he would go to his workshop. He had his spirit ally altar in his workshop, in his silversmithing workshop, and he would do his offerings and then he would start his work. So I was like, actually, let's try what Aidan does. Aidan, like he's my mate, and I started doing them in the mornings, and actually I'm really enjoying it. I would like to be able to do them earlier in the morning. I would like to do them like, you know, when I get up a lot earlier than my spouse. So my spouse doesn't usually get up. My spouse usually gets up after me, so I go downstairs, I have my breakfast, showered breakfast, all that stuff, do my journaling downstairs and everything. But because I like to speak aloud my offerings and talk aloud at my altar for the most part, I can't really do that while my spouse is asleep. Also, I feel like I am a bit more self-conscious because I'm trying to just sort of let stuff flow from me, and I can't do that if someone else is in the room because they're very personal. So I have to wait until my spouse is up. So it doesn't mean I do it a little later than I would like, but I've still preferred doing it in the mornings. Wow, this is going wildly sort of off topic at the moment. But yeah, so I was thinking about, I had to adapt, I had to be flexible, I had to change my plan of doing my offering in the morning into the evening. I had to be flexible because unseen circumstances came up, and this is something I'm very bad at least initially. So I have a tendency to have real meltdowns if things don't go to plan. Like if things don't go how I think they're gonna go, it could be the smallest thing, it really sends me into like a proper meltdown, and it's almost like it's really hard for me to control, and almost part of my brain or part of me is looking down at me going, why are you making a big deal out of this? Why are you so stressed out about this? Because it could be like the most innocuous thing. And it's almost like I have this freak out, and then but then I sort of, once I've had that freak out, it's almost like I assimilate it and adjust really quickly. It's really weird. It's almost like I just need to get the freak out of the way, and then my brain goes, oh, I get the other side of my brain, which is much more rational and sort of actually quite good at problem solving and quite sort of adaptable sort of kicks in. But there's this layer of me that just has these freakouts. Luckily yesterday I didn't freak out. I just was like, again, it depends on what it is that's going wrong or is changing. It doesn't have to be something going wrong, it could just be something that is sort of changing. I just sort of adapted, and I was like, it's so, being resilient also means being adaptable and flexible. So I keep getting distracted by my, like, I feel like I'm distracting you folks watching, but I keep playing with my my bloody sleeves. But it was because it was so warm with the window closed. I feel like I've adjusted a bit now. I had to sort of pull my sleeves up, give my pits a bit of an airing. Anyway, I'm just going to drink some more of this. It's good and cold. But yeah, so it made me realise that that tendency for me to freak out is not great when it comes to being resilient, but also due to the way my brain is wired, it's really difficult to sort of break myself out of that. So it's like constantly fighting against myself. And again, it made me think of temperance, and we think of temperance when you think of at least the sort of thoth. I believe it's a thoth. I can't remember the word for temperance in the thoth deck off the top of my head, honestly. Or at least the Smith-Waite deck, that you're thinking, I think that alchemy gets mentioned a lot, and that sort of that flow and that transmutation and that idea of the philosopher's stone, which on the surface appears to be about transmuting base metals into gold, so turning something less valuable into something more valuable, but is actually a metaphor for turning the is for enlightenment, for turning it's about the great work and turning your sort of your the baseness, not the baseness of your soul, if you think of, if you believe in a soul, is sort of eternal and what have you, but that sort of your base humanness and bringing yourself up through being enlightened and sort of elevating yourself and becoming more self-aware, and sort of that whole idea of ego death and all that stuff. So yeah, that ties in with temperance, this sort of me fighting with that part of myself that freaks out when things change. I feel like that great work, that philosopher's stone, is sort of transmuting that learning, and I don't know if that's possible without medication or certain other types of help to like not do that so much. I think it's always going to be a part of who I am, but trying to sort of be a bit more aware of when it's happening and having tools to try and work around it or work through it more quickly or more easily. I don't know. But it all ties into temperance and resilience. The other idea about temperance that so hang on, I'm getting ahead of myself. Let me go to the cards that I have. So a lot of the time I wrote down the words that I thought of immediately when I think of the card Temperance, whether that be the Smith-Waite version or the Marseille version, the two that I'm most familiar with. I am kind of familiar with Thoth, but I haven't really sat and studied out that properly for a while now, so it's not as sort of, I'm not as au fait with the Thoth. But there were the 5 words that came to mind to me immediately, so I just closed my eyes, thought of the words that came up, and I wrote them down, and there was moderation, harmony, balance, alchemy, so that's sort of again that philosopher's stone, and flowing or flow, because I'm thinking of the water. It feels very sort of there's a very sort of calming feel about the Temperance card. So in the Ostara tarot, let's see if I can get a good. God, this camera's bobbins. We have a character here. This is our Temperance character, and we have predator and prey coming out of this container. And the book, the Ostara tarot book, talks about you know, duality and you know, everything needing to exist to provide balance. Let me see if I can find the Temperance here. It was talking about Everything in this world hinges on the nuances of balance. Where something is taken, it must be given. That whole idea again, like, you know, that saying, a life for a life, for example. Light is necessary to cast shadow, which is interesting because I'm reading Ursula K. Le Guin's The Left Hand of Darkness, and I've literally just read the chapter where The Left Hand of Darkness, the title of the book, comes up, and it comes from a poem from this culture that is featured within the book. And it's a really beautiful poem. And I think I might put it in my sort of book of quotes because I really, really like it. But it talks about sort of the need for, you know, it says light is the left hand of darkness, and it goes on to talk about sort of opposites, but it's in a non-dualist way, in that it's all seen as the one rather than polar opposites. So it's almost like saying there are these opposites, but they're all part of the same thing. They're two sides of the same coin, which I think is really interesting. And this card. So what I was doing, because I had been, the reason I'm showing you these cards is because I've been using on Temperance on and off, but not in any sort of real capacity, and I thought I would sort of start pulling out cards from other decks and looking at guidebooks and seeing how other artists and writers had interpreted this card, and how I can relate it to resilience, and how I can relate it to it being my card of the year, and how I can work with it and find it useful. What can I learn from it? But it says here, it takes developing a special thoughtfulness to understand the duality of the world and to accept your place within it. And then further on it says, this is a card of self-reflection and careful planning, which is interesting, right? That balance, that harmony, that calming sensation, that moments to sort of it's a moment where things are even, everything is perfectly blended and balanced, and that sort of, it's that fine ecosystem, right? It's all part of the whole. That duality is all part of the whole. And I know that certain belief systems talk about non-duality, which I guess this plays into. In a sense, when we talk about duality, I hadn't really ever thought of how duality plays into non-duality. Interesting. I don't know a huge amount about sort of non-duality and Buddhism and stuff like that, but only what I've sort of bits that I've read or absorbed along the way. And then I looked at the Sasarobito Tarot, and this guidebook, Stacia Barrington, talks about this. They call this. She calls this a sort of non-binary angelic being, and they are pouring liquid from one vessel into another. It's a very sort of very sort of modern interpretation, and they look quite somber. But she says that this is a card of health, and goes on in the guidebook to talk about it being a card of sort of recovery and security and well-being, which I guess when we think about what I was talking about earlier, how you're taking a moment to step back, taking a break from social media, taking a break from, you know, maybe you've injured yourself working out at the gym and you've overdone it and you need to rest that muscle you've injured, right? Like whatever it is, to recuperate, to build resilience. You know, when a bone breaks, when it heals, it's often healed stronger. Resilience, taking a rest, taking a break, recovery, security, well-being. She also talks about in her guidebook that it's the joining of forces, almost the bringing together of polar opposites or extreme opposites or opposing forces, and sort of blending that into something much more sort of cohesive. And what was it she said actually? Let's have a look. I'm trying to go off from sort of my notes and sort of memory, but my memory, as I've often said these days, is absolute bobbins. The joining of forces and bringing together of extremes. This is a blending or a synthesis of opposites. A synthesis, blending something and making something new, something balanced, something tempered, temperance. So we've had our three temperance cards so far. Another card that I looked at, which is a card that I'd worked with recently as part of my year in the Wildwood, which is Balance. And this was one of the cards for Bealtaina during the year in the Wildwood that I'm doing. And here it's a very different interpretation. sort of pictorially straight off, we don't actually have any human figures or human-like figures. We have these two sort of dragon serpent type creatures. We do have a carved humanoid face at the bottom here, and it's mentioned that it's, you know, one half is in light and one half is in shadow. Again, the opposites, the balance. And in this deck, it talks about the red representing the element of wands and the element of fire and blood. And I've got a note here, blood and fire and iron. And then the white representing air, or the arrows. And it's, sorry, no, bows is fire and arrows is air, sorry. And it represents, the white represents ash and milk and bone, and it says that it talks about how these two come together when you think about Bealtaina and sort of May Day and fertility, all those kind of sort of more sort of pagan-esque, you know, however new or old those practices and traditions are around the creative impulse, whether that is, you know, the coming together of opposites for animals during, you know, mating season, for people, for just creative ideas, and yeah, that sort of just creative impulse. You know, your fire and water thought, you know, when you think about, you need to have the thought and the impulse to sort of then enact the idea, right? So you have, how does it go? I can't remember what order the elements go in the tarot. That's really bad, because I know that you know, you need thought and which is air, and you need fire, which is the creativity, passion, impulse, you know, the wands, to then make something real, which is earth, which is the pentacles or the coins. But I can never remember where cups comes into. I think cups comes first, but I can never quite remember. So weird, it will never stick on my brain. 26 years and it will just not stick in my brain. Why am I like this? But anyway, so it talks about also in the guidebook for the Wild Word about there needing to be a balance between humanity and nature. Now, I'm not a fan of this separation of humanity and nature. Humans are nature. We are a part of nature. We are not. What I'm doing. I talk with my hands a lot, I've realised. We are not separate from nature. We are nature. And I know what people mean when they talk about nature. They mean animals and plants and trees and wild spaces, and even cultivated wild spaces, like my local Park, for example, which I have to spell because Dr. Nami is right there lying in a patch of sun. She's toasting her buns in the sun. Are you right there, boo-boo? Don't overheat. She will lay there until she is panting her little face off because she's a silly sausage. Anyway, but yeah, there was a different take, but kind of still playing into the idea of temperance. And actually, when you think about the balance of humanity and nature, if we're taking it in the way that it is written in the book, and how we have become so disconnected, and again, I spoke about this in my video last week, that disconnection between, you know, our environment, from where our food comes from where our clothes come from how things are made, to how we consume them. This disconnect leads to sort of this emptiness in us, but also this disconnect means that we end up abusing and ruining and stripping our natural resources. And so therefore temperance and balance is required for us to be resilient, because if we completely destroy or burn through all of our natural resources, if we upset the ecosystem, we will no longer have resilience, because we will not be able to survive. And that's why the climate crisis is called the climate crisis. We are hurtling into a pretty scary future, honestly, and no one seems to want to look at it. The two things people don't want to be seen mentioned, and by people I mean governments and big business, and so people don't see it as much of a threat, which is, you know, the panini and climate crisis, two very big issues at the moment. So yes, that's the Wildwood. I've already spoken about the next Wild Tarot at the beginning, because that was the one that kicked it all off. I also pulled out the Playful Heart Tarot because I just love this Temperance card. me see if I can get it. Sorry, I was just drinking some more of my tea. We've got this adorable little character. You can see she doesn't have two bowls. She has one bowl and she has two spoons. One plain wooden spoon and one wooden spoon that seems to have a painted handle. And if you can see inside her bowl, it seems to be mixing a rainbow concoction, and this rainbow concoction has been used to dip these strawberries, and it's really sweet, and it sort of feels very it really leans into the creativity side of things, that sort of artistic creative impulse, which again, creative impulse, funnily enough, two very different decks, ties in with the guidebook and the ideas around the wildwood, which is, you know, is interesting. So different, and yet some similar stuff going on there. And in the Playful Heart Tarot guidebook, the creator, I can never remember her name, I'm terrible, is, why can I never remember, I can't remember her name ever off the top of my head, lovely lady, but Kitten Chops is her art name, says that the Temperance character is patient and kind. She's very smart, she's curious and creative, and she uses both her knowledge and her intuition to create and to blend and to synthesize. And I really like that. It's taking the idea of something intuition, something from the gut, and knowledge, your head learning, your book learning, your knowledge. Well, knowledge can be gained through, knowledge isn't just book learning, knowledge is also the things that we learn along the way as we go through life. Often sort of, I guess, described as wisdom more so maybe. But, you know, these words that keep coming up that I hadn't really thought of when I sort of brainstormed the first few words that come to mind when I think of temperance, you know, so self-reflection, careful planning, health, patience, you know, patience is getting mentioned a lot, calmness, intuition, you know, trial and error. These are all being mentioned, which is interesting, which I hadn't initially thought of myself. Of course, I've by no means pulled out every single temperance card that I have, or every single guidebook I have, or even sort of just tarot books. Like I haven't pulled out 78 Degrees of Wisdom or any of my other sort of tarot sort of deep dive books. I'm just going by like guidebooks to get sort of the interpretation for the specific cards that I've pulled out, because I really like to hear about what the artist and or the writer that worked with the artist has to say. So a couple of other cards I pulled out. I pulled out a couple of Marseille style decks. Neither of these are traditional in any sense. We have the Squid Cake Marseille by Jess Roller here. This is my independent version. Come on, there we go. With the coffee cups, I really love this, and I love the little bat wings. I really just think this is a really cute play. And in the book, Jess Roller mentions, again, words that I mentioned, which is sort of moderation and harmony and flow and balance and that kind of thing, synthesizing. And then here we have Patrick Valenza's Triomphe della Luna. This is the paradoxical rose version. It's my favorite one. And here we have a more sort of, well, Patrick Valenza-esque take on the character often depicted in Temperance. And this character, you know, one breast covered, one breast bared, so almost like the modesty and the immodesty. I mean, I don't really hold any truck with the idea of modesty and immodesty, if I'm honest, but you know, there's this sort of duality there. We've got wings. Both wings seem to be turned to the side slightly there, but then we also have sort of horns there at the front, that duality almost of an angel and a devil. And I just really like that depiction. You've got the cups that she's pouring what looks like water, or they are pouring, she, he, they, them, pouring water from one vessel to the other, as is tradition. Interestingly, here when you see in the Temperance card for the next world, there is no synthesis between vessels. There is simply a pouring out from this bottle onto the ground, which has more in common, I guess, with the Star Tarot, which is actually one of my personal cards. Like one of my cards is like, yeah, the star is my card. When you add up my birth card, that's it, is the star. So I like that there's this tie-in with that. I was wondering if any of the other ones, so this one is a single vessel rather than two, so we've got, so you know, this one, there's no pouring, she's just mixing within this vessel, and then with this one there's no pouring between, there is just a pouring out of the vessel. So they both sort of differ from the traditional sort of idea of that blending. And of course here we have one vessel from which two polar opposites are bursting forth, the predators and the prey. It's really interesting to see how different people interpret the same idea. I really like it. It's one of the reasons I love tarot. And the final Temperance card I want to talk about is the one from the Fifth Spirit Tarot. Oh my goodness, I love this little guidebook. Charlie Claire Burgess, they are the artist, and they also wrote this book, and they're non-binary, and they just come at this from a fully non-binary, genderless, genderqueer kind of perspective in the entire book, and it is one of my favourite guidebooks. It's very wee, but it really packs a punch. I would say it's worth getting. The deck is amazing, by the way. I love the deck, but I would say even if you weren't into the deck, at least worth getting to get the book alone. But the deck is awesome. But I just wanted to read what Charlie had written about Temperance, because I think it's perfect, and it differs so much from any other description of Temperance I'd ever read until now. So I'm going to read it, and I hope Charlie doesn't mind, but I really do urge you to get this deck. Here's the card. So again, we do have the synthesis here, and here we have two open bowls, and we have what appears to be fire and water combining here, and you can see they're starting to blend there in the middle and synthesize, and Temperance has their eyes closed. And their wings, look at their wings. They got their shoes off, one foot on land, one foot in the water. Oh, it's stunning. It's stunning. Anyway, so here, oh, there goes. I'm going to have to go answer the door. I'll be back. I'll have to remember this. Okay, yes, it was my delivery, but that's done now. It's all sorted. Some bits and bobs for Dr. Nomi. But yes, Temperance and the Fifth Spirit Tarot by Charlie Claire Burgess says about Temperance. In Temperance, we emerge into the rebirth of the other side of death, freed from the illusions and constraints that formerly held us. Temperance mixes the two cups that represent dualities and binaries in a radically non-binary act, in a subversive synthesis that defies and transcends rules and norms. Life isn't meant to neatly fit into containers. Temperance teaches us it is meant to be lived fluidly and fully in a constant state of flux and exchange. Many tarot sources say this card is about moderation, but I disagree. Temperance does not want you to water down your extremes until you become bland and tepid. Instead, they want you to ecstatically bridge all your disparate parts, all your contradictions, and allow them to temper. An old word meaning to strengthen or improve through exposure to extremes, like tempering a sword, right? Tempering metal. The substance of your spirit. Alchemy, the philosopher's stone. When Temperance appears, they encourage you to seek harmony, not homogeneity. Accept the contradictory parts of yourself and live brilliantly in your truth. None of us can be reduced to just one thing. We are each manifold. And I feel like that does tie quite nicely with the way that Christy C. Rhodes talks about Temperance, this particular character of Temperance, loving herself, even the broken parts of herself, the contradictory parts of herself, and fighting anyway and doing the best she can anyway. There's this sort of acceptance here from both of these characters. And I really like that, right? When you think about it, yes, temperance, to temper, to make something stronger, so you can find balance and synthesis with everything that you are and everything that you do. And it doesn't have to necessarily mean calm or patient or the middle way, the middle road. It can just simply mean the synthesis of all that you are into something new and beautiful and interesting and different, right? So anyway, I'm going to leave it at that, because that is a real old bloody waffle and all sorts of stuff. It's a shame the doorbell went just when I was almost finished. It sort of threw me off a little bit, but I feel like I brought it back. Yeah, so what's that? Yeah, 45 minutes is quite a while. So if you have watched this, thank you so much for listening. I'd really like to hear your thoughts around temperance, your ideas of the temperance card, maybe what your favourite depiction of temperance is, in whichever deck is your favourite depiction, and why. Or maybe not necessarily the card itself, maybe the guidebook has just something particularly pertinent to say about temperance for you. Have you had to work through temperance as your card of the year? And if so, I'd like to know what kind of lessons you found yourself learning from it. I'm just finding it really interesting that it's sort of really tying in with this idea of resilience. And I know I keep making videos about it, but it's because it's something I'm thinking about a lot, and something that I'm sort of working in and around and through, and what that means for me, and how I can learn something from it, or how I can incorporate it or build it in my life. So, okay, now I'm starting to feel really warm again. I can't wait to get that window open. So yeah, I'm going to leave it there. Thank you so much for your time. I really appreciate it. I really appreciate you. Look after yourself, and I will see you in the next one. Ciao.